How did people in the medieval period truly view their elders? Did they see wisdom or decay? Did they offer respect or neglect? The answers to these questions, from roughly 500 C to 1500 C, might genuinely astound you. Number 1. Old age as a humoral imbalance and cooling. Medical thought in the medieval era was deeply rooted in the concept of the four humors: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. These bodily fluids were believed to determine a person's temperament, health, and even their stage of life. Old age within this intricate system was understood not just as a natural progression but as a fundamental shift in the body's internal balance, particularly a profound cooling and drying. A newborn infant, for instance, was seen as inherently hot and moist, full of vitality and warmth. As a person moved through youth and adulthood, this warmth and moisture gradually diminished. By the time old age arrived, the body was thought to have lost much of its innate heat and moisture, leading to a predominance of cold and dry humors. This belief held significant implications for how physicians and even ordinary people approached the care of the elderly. The prevailing medical texts of the time, often drawing from the ancient Greek physician Galen, described old age as a kind of final winter of the body. The natural heat that fueled digestion and circulation was believed to lessen, making the elderly more susceptible to cold, both external and internal. This was not merely a poetic metaphor. It was a foundational physiological principle. For example, a person experiencing the tremors often associated with advanced years was not simply seen as weak. Their shivering was attributed to an internal coldness that the body could no longer combat effectively. Their skin might become dry and wrinkled, and this was viewed as a direct result of the loss of moisture, much like a fruit shriveling as it ages. Treatments for the elderly, therefore, were often focused on trying to counteract this perceived internal chill and dryness. Physicians might recommend warm foods, such as root vegetables cooked slowly, or rich broths made from easily digestible meats. Spicy herbs like ginger or cinnamon were sometimes prescribed, not just for flavor but for their perceived warming properties. Warm baths, often infused with specific herbs, were also suggested, not for hygiene alone, but to introduce external heat and moisture back into the failing system. Clothing was also a matter of medical advice. The elderly were encouraged to wear multiple layers, often made of wool, to preserve their precious internal heat. Even their living quarters might be designed to be warmer and less drafty, reflecting the concern for their susceptibility to cold. Beyond physical remedies, the humoral theory also influenced perceptions of an elder's temperament and disposition. A surplus of black bile, for example, was associated with melancholy and a gloomy outlook. If old age inherently led to a colder, drier constitution, it could also contribute to an increase in black bile, making the elderly more prone to sadness or a generally more pessimistic view of life. This was not seen as a psychological failing, but as a direct result of their bodily composition. Similarly, a decrease in blood, the hot and moist humor, could lead to a perceived lack of vital energy and a general slowing down both physically and mentally. The medical world of the Middle Ages did not separate the body from the mind in the way modern medicine often does. The physical state was intrinsically linked to the mental and emotional one. This understanding of old age as a natural cooling process was not confined to academic medical treatises. It filtered down into common parlance and domestic practices. Families might instinctively ensure their elders had a warm place by the hearth, or that they received the most nourishing, easily digestible parts of a meal. There was a general understanding that the old required more warmth and gentler handling due to their diminished vital fires. It was a belief system that shaped daily life, influencing diet, clothing, housing, and even social interactions, all aimed at staving off the inevitable chill that was thought to creep into the bones of the aged. The slow decline, the loss of vigor, and the increased vulnerability were all explained through this elegant, albeit now outdated framework of the four humors. It was a surprisingly scientific for its time approach to understanding the physical changes of aging, grounded in the observable phenomena of bodily warmth and moisture. Number 2. The Ages of Man framework and the decline. Medieval society had a deeply ingrained way of categorizing human life, often referred to as the ages of man. This concept, derived from classical antiquity and reinterpreted through a Christian lens, proposed that human existence unfolded in a series of distinct stages, each with its own characteristics, duties, and perceived trajectory. While the exact number of ages varied, some schemes proposed 7, others as few as 3 or as many as 10. The consistent feature was that old age represented the final, often longest, and most challenging stage, marked by a clear and unavoidable physical and mental decline. This was not just a philosophical idea, it was a pervasive cultural framework that shaped expectations for and attitudes toward the elderly. One popular schema, often linked to the Roman poet Ovid and later adopted by medieval thinkers, depicted 7 ages: infancy, childhood, adolescence, youth, manhood, old age, and extreme old age. The manhood stage was typically seen as the pinnacle, a period of strength, wisdom, and productivity. From this point onward, the trajectory was almost universally depicted as downward. Old age, or senectus, was not viewed as a period of continued growth or new experiences, but rather as a process of decay, a gradual retreat from the vigor of youth. Physical weakness was a given, depicted in art and literature as stooped postures, reliance on staffs, and failing eyesight. The senses were believed to dull, the memory to falter, and the capacity for physical labor to diminish. This framework created a very specific set of expectations for the elderly. They were expected to be frail, to move slowly, and to rely more on others. This expectation was not necessarily negative in all contexts, as it also provided a justification for their removal from strenuous work and a societal understanding that they required care. However, it also meant that deviations from this expected decline were rare in cultural representation. A spry, active elder might have been seen as an anomaly, or perhaps even a miracle, rather than a normal variation of aging. The narrative was one of unavoidable and progressive deterioration. The decline was not only physical, it was also often portrayed as a mental and spiritual one. While some traditions emphasized wisdom in old age, the ages of man often focused on the loss of faculties, forgetfulness, a tendency towards grumpiness, and even the return to childlike behavior were sometimes attributed to advanced years. Medical texts of the time, aligning with the humoral theory, suggested that the cooling and drying of the body in old age led to a decrease in the animal spirits responsible for thought and movement, contributing to a slowing of mental processes. This was not a moral judgment, but a perceived physiological reality. Artistic representations of the ages of man vividly illustrated this decline. Often a circular diagram would show figures representing each age, with the elder figure at the bottom, sometimes struggling, sometimes resigned, and always depicted with signs of physical frailty. In morality plays and literature, the character of old age would often appear as a withered figure, sometimes blind or deaf, personifying the burdens of the final stage of life. These portrayals reinforced the societal belief that old age was fundamentally a period of loss and diminishment, a preparation for the inevitable end. Even within religious discourse, while old age could be seen as a time for spiritual reflection, it was often framed within the context of the body's decay. Sermons might remind congregations of the fleeting nature of earthly life by pointing to the visible signs of aging, encouraging them to prepare their souls before their bodies completely failed them. The ages of man served as a constant visual and conceptual reminder of human mortality and the transient nature of physical existence, with old age being the penultimate stage before the ultimate transition. This pervasive cultural model, more than any other, set the stage for how medieval people understood the journey of life, and where old age firmly sat within that journey as a period of a very defined and expected decline. Number 3. Old age as a spiritual test, or path to piety. Within the profoundly religious framework of the medieval world, old age was frequently interpreted as a period of intense spiritual significance, a final testing ground for the soul before its journey to the afterlife. It was not simply a physical decline, but a divinely ordained stage, designed for reflection, penance, and the deepening of one's faith. For many, the weakening of the body in old age was seen as a deliberate act of God, a merciful way to detach the individual from earthly pleasures and distractions, thereby allowing them to focus entirely on their spiritual salvation. This belief pervaded sermons, devotional literature, and the lived experiences of the elderly, transforming physical infirmity into a spiritual opportunity. Church teachings emphasized the transitory nature of worldly existence and the paramount importance of preparing the soul for eternity. Old age, with its inherent physical limitations and proximity to death, served as a potent, undeniable reminder of this truth. A person reaching old age was, in a sense, granted a grace period, a last chance to atone for past sins, to perform good works, and to intensify their prayers. Confession became even more critical for the elderly, as they sought to cleanse their souls before facing divine judgment. Many would donate to the church, embark on pilgrimages if physically able, or dedicate themselves to charitable acts, all seen as accumulating spiritual merit for the afterlife. Monastic life offered a clear example of this spiritual focus. Monasteries and convents often served as places where the elderly, both lay and religious, could retreat to spend their final years in prayer and contemplation. For those who had lived a worldly life, entering a monastic community in old age was sometimes viewed as a definitive commitment to piety, a final embrace of religious discipline. They would perform light duties, attend daily services, and spend hours in prayer, embodying the ideal of an elder consumed by spiritual devotion. Their very presence served as a living sermon for younger members, a constant reminder of the brevity of life and the importance of spiritual preparation. Sermons frequently addressed the elderly, urging them to embrace their physical weakness as a spiritual strength. A popular theme was that the pains and infirmities of old age were a form of purgation, a kind of earthly penance that could reduce the time spent in purgatory after death. Each ache, each loss of a faculty could be reframed as a divine trial, a challenge to one's patience and faith. This perspective offered a profound psychological comfort in an age without modern pain relief, transforming suffering into a pathway to salvation. An old person enduring a chronic ailment might be seen as blessed, undergoing a purification process that brought them closer to God. Devotional books and hagiographies, the lives of saints, often featured elderly figures who achieved great spiritual insight or performed miraculous acts in their declining years. These stories provided models for how to approach old age with grace and unwavering faith. The very act of living to a ripe old age could itself be seen as a sign of divine favor, an indication that God had granted more time for repentance and spiritual growth. Conversely, a sudden early death might be interpreted as a warning, emphasizing the uncertainty of life and the need for constant vigilance, even for the young. The focus on the spiritual dimension of old age meant that earthly achievements or social status often receded in importance. What mattered most was the state of one's soul. An elderly peasant who lived a pious life might be considered more spiritually successful than a wealthy noble who neglected their religious duties. This belief shaped the internal landscape of aging, providing a framework for understanding and accepting the inevitable changes of the body, redirecting focus from physical decline to the eternal prospects of the soul. It was a powerful cultural narrative that imbued the final years of life with profound purpose and meaning. Beyond the mere biological process of aging. Number 4. The Venerable Sage. Wisdom and authority in the elder. Despite the pervasive narrative of physical decline, medieval society also held a powerful and often contradictory belief that old age was inherently linked to wisdom, experience, and authority. The venerable sage, the wise elder, whose counsel was sought and respected, was a prominent archetype across various social strata, from the village elder to the seasoned monarch or abbot. This perception granted a significant degree of social power and influence to the aged, transforming their years into a source of legitimate guidance and moral uprightness. It was a recognition that while the body might weaken, the mind, through accumulated experience, could reach its zenith. In communities, the eldest members were often the repositories of local history, customary law, and traditional practices. Before widespread literacy and printed books, oral transmission was crucial for preserving knowledge, and the memories of the old were invaluable. They knew the lineage of families, the boundaries of fields, the proper seasons for planting, and the customary ways of resolving disputes. When a difficult decision arose, whether concerning a land dispute or a communal feast, the elders were frequently consulted. Their long lives meant they had witnessed many cycles of prosperity and hardship, providing a perspective that younger generations lacked. Their advice was not merely opinion. It was seen as wisdom forged in the crucible of time and experience. Within the family unit, the patriarch or matriarch, if they lived to old age, often retained significant authority. They might oversee the distribution of inherited land, approve marriages, or guide the upbringing of grandchildren. Even if they had formally retired from active labor, their presence and counsel held weight. Their lived experience often made them practical strategists in an agrarian society, capable of offering advice on weather patterns, crop rotation, or animal husbandry that was grounded in decades of observation. Disrespecting an elder's wisdom was often seen as foolishness, a disregard for proven knowledge. In the political and religious spheres, old age was frequently a prerequisite for leadership. Bishops, abbots, and sometimes even kings were expected to be mature, if not elderly, individuals. The weight of experience was deemed essential for making sound judgments, navigating complex political landscapes, and guiding spiritual flocks. A young ruler might be advised by a council of older nobles whose gray hairs signified their deep understanding of governance and diplomacy. Figures like Charlemagne, though often depicted as vigorous, also gained the reputation for sagacity that grew with his years. The long reign of monarchs like Louis IX of France or Edward III of England contributed to their image as wise and venerable leaders whose authority was buttressed by their extensive experience. Theological and philosophical writings also underscored the value of age. Scholars and theologians who dedicated their lives to study often reached their peak of intellectual output in their later years, their accumulated knowledge forming a vast reservoir of understanding. Thinkers like Thomas Aquinas, though he died relatively young, was still seen as having attained a profound intellectual maturity that came with years of rigorous study. Monastic rules often afforded special respect and privileges to the elder monks and nuns, recognizing their spiritual seniority and accumulated wisdom. Their long dedication to prayer and study was seen as yielding a deeper connection to divine truth. This reverence for the elder as a source of wisdom was not without its nuances. While physical decline was acknowledged, the mind was often expected to grow sharper with age, like fine wine. Proverbs and folk tales reinforce the idea that listening to the old was the path to success and avoiding folly. A young person disregarding an elder's advice might be portrayed as arrogant and destined for failure. This belief in the wisdom of the aged provided a crucial counterpoint to the narratives of decay, offering a significant and often positive social role for those who had reached the latter stages of life. Their experience was a living library, their counsel a valuable guide, and their presence a source of stability and continuity in a world where change was often slow but profound. Number 5. Old women as witches or sages, a dual perception. The medieval perception of old women was strikingly bifurcated, swinging wildly between extremes of reverence and profound suspicion. On one hand, the aged woman could be venerated as a wise crone, a repository of traditional knowledge, a skilled healer, or a spiritual guide. On the other, she was frequently demonized, viewed with fear as a practitioner of dark magic, a witch in league with malevolent forces. This stark dualism reveals much about gender roles, power dynamics, and societal anxieties of the time, often reflecting the vulnerability and perceived power of women beyond childbearing age. The respected older woman, sometimes called a wise woman or cunning woman, played a crucial role in many communities. She might be the village midwife, possessing generations of practical knowledge about childbirth, herbal remedies, and basic medical care. Her experience in healing was often empirical, passed down orally, encompassing an understanding of medicinal plants, poultices, and charms. She might also act as a counselor, mediator, or even a fortune teller, offering advice on matters of the heart, family disputes, or agricultural success. Her age lent her an air of authority and trustworthiness, as her long life suggested accumulated wisdom and a deep understanding of human nature and the natural world. These women often lived on the fringes of formal society, particularly the patriarchal church structure, yet they were indispensable to daily life, particularly for other women who sought their expertise on matters of health, fertility, and domestic well-being. However, this same knowledge and perceived influence could become a source of immense suspicion, particularly when combined with an old woman's often independent status and lack of male protection after widowhood. The Church, increasingly asserting its authority over folk practices, viewed many traditional healing methods and superstitions as pagan remnants or outright heresy. An old woman's ability to heal might be reinterpreted as a pact with the devil. Her knowledge of herbs could be twisted into the making of poisons or love potions with sinister intent. Her wisdom, if it strayed from sanctioned theological doctrine, could be relabeled as sorcery. The image of the witch, particularly prominent in the later medieval period and escalating into the early modern era, was often an old solitary woman. Her physical appearance, wrinkled skin, hunched back, perhaps a missing tooth, which was simply the natural consequence of aging, was often portrayed as evidence of her sinister nature, a visible mark of her corruption. Her poverty, if she was a widow or had no surviving family, could make her an easy scapegoat for misfortunes, from crop failures to illness. The fear of magic, combined with misogynistic attitudes, created a fertile ground for accusations. An old woman muttering to herself might be seen as casting a spell. Her pet cat, a common companion for the lonely, could be considered her familiar, a demonic helper. Tales and legal records from the period show how easily the shift from revered elder to feared witch could occur. A woman whose herbal remedies failed might face accusations of maleficium, causing harm through magic. A dispute with a neighbor could escalate into charges of bewitchment if one party fell ill. The very attributes that made an old woman valuable, her independence, her knowledge, her sometimes eccentric habits, could be twisted into evidence against her. She was a figure who stood outside the usual patriarchal structures, a woman whose sexuality was often considered dried up and therefore less threatening in one sense, but whose spiritual power was therefore seen as deviant and dangerous. This dual perception highlights a fundamental tension in medieval society's view of aging women. They could be revered for their accumulated wisdom and practical skills, embodying a living connection to tradition and a source of vital community services. Yet the same attributes, particularly when combined with the vulnerability of age and widowhood, could make them targets of intense fear and persecution. Their bodies and their knowledge were both sources of respect and suspicion, reflecting the complex and often contradictory attitudes towards female power and autonomy in the medieval world. Number 6. The quest for rejuvenation. Alchemy and medical elixirs. Despite the widely accepted belief in old age as an inevitable decline, the medieval period was not without its fervent attempts to defy this fate. A fascinating undercurrent of thought and practice revolved around the quest for rejuvenation, for delaying the onset of old age, or even for achieving a form of earthly immortality. This pursuit, often intertwined with the esoteric arts of alchemy and speculative medical theories, highlights a deep-seated human desire to extend life and restore youthful vigor, demonstrating a surprising defiance of the perceived natural order. Alchemists, those mysterious figures who sought to transmute base metals into gold, often had a broader agenda. Their ultimate goal was not merely material wealth, but spiritual perfection and, crucially, the creation of a universal panacea, or elixir of life. This mythical substance, sometimes called the Philosopher's Stone, was believed to cure all diseases, prolong life indefinitely, and even restore youth. Texts attributed to influential alchemists like Geber or Roger Bacon, though often misattributed to him in later centuries, contained recipes and theories for creating potent compounds that could supposedly ward off decay. These concoctions were often complex, involving distillation, fermentation, and the use of rare or symbolically significant ingredients like gold, mercury, or precious stones. Believed to embody purity and vitality, the pursuit of these elixirs was not always seen as entirely contrary to Christian doctrine, particularly if framed as exploring God's hidden secrets within nature. Some believed that by perfecting nature, humanity could return to a state closer to paradise, where Adam and Eve enjoyed immortality before the fall. The alchemical process, therefore, was sometimes seen as a spiritual journey, as much as a scientific one, purifying both matter and the alchemist's soul. An alchemist spending years in a laboratory surrounded by alembics and retorts might genuinely believe they were on the verge of discovering the secret to perpetual youth, a divine gift waiting to be unlocked. Beyond the more mystical realms of alchemy, conventional medieval medicine also explored dietetics and specific remedies aimed at slowing aging. Building on Galenic principles, physicians would recommend specific diets tailored to counteract the cooling and drying effects of old age. This might involve consuming foods perceived as warming and moistening, such as sweet wines, fatty meats, and certain spiced dishes. Herbal remedies believed to strengthen vital organs or improve circulation were also popular. While these were not elixirs of life in the alchemical sense, they represented a medical attempt to manage and mitigate the processes of aging, to make the elder years more comfortable and perhaps slightly longer. Notable figures throughout the medieval period were rumored to have engaged in these pursuits. Pope Sylvester II, for example, was an intellectual who dabbled in various sciences, and legends later connected him with alchemy and the search for longevity. The legendary figure of Nicolas Flamel, the Parisian scribe, became famous centuries after his death for being a supposed alchemist who achieved immortality, a testament to how deeply the idea of prolonged life resonated in the public imagination. While these stories were often fanciful, they reflected a widespread fascination with extending human lifespan beyond its natural limits. The desire to cheat death and reverse the effects of time was a powerful motivator driving some of the most complex and esoteric intellectual pursuits of the era. Whether through the transmutation of metals into a panacea or the careful cultivation of specific diets and herbal remedies, medieval people, or at least a significant segment of them, were not passive observers of their own aging. They actively sought ways to push back against the inevitable, to harness the hidden powers of nature, and perhaps to reclaim a lost youth. This persistent belief in the possibility of rejuvenation, even if confined to the fringes of mainstream medical practice, offers a surprising glimpse into the medieval imagination and its enduring hope for transcending mortal limits. Number 7. Economic piety and the unproductive elder. The medieval period, predominantly an agrarian society, presented a complex picture regarding the economic role and status of the elderly. While wisdom and authority were often ascribed to them, there was also a stark reality. Old age frequently brought physical limitations that reduced or eliminated a person's ability to engage in manual labor, leading to economic dependency. This transition from being a productive contributor to requiring support was a significant challenge, shaping family dynamics, community responsibilities, and even legal customs regarding property and care. The unproductive elder, in terms of physical output, was a real and pressing concern. For the vast majority of the population, life revolved around agriculture. Physical strength and endurance were paramount for farming crafts and other forms of manual labor. As a person aged, their capacity for strenuous work diminished. The peasant farmer could no longer wield the plow with the same force. The weaver's eyesight might fail, and the blacksmith's arm would tire easily. This gradual decline in physical capability directly impacted their economic independence. Without the ability to produce food, goods, or services, the elderly often became reliant on their children, extended family, or the charity of the church and community. This dependency was formalized in various ways. In rural areas, retirement contracts were not uncommon. These were informal or sometimes written agreements where an elderly parent would transfer their land or property to a child in exchange for a promise of lifelong care. This care would include food, lodging, clothing, and often a specific amount of grain or other provisions. These contracts were often detailed, outlining everything from the amount of bread to be provided daily to a warm place by the fire. Such arrangements highlight the transactional nature of elderly care, where continued support was exchanged for inherited wealth or land. If the children failed to uphold their end of the bargain, disputes could arise, sometimes brought before local courts or community elders for arbitration. For those without family or sufficient property, the situation could be dire. The church played a significant role in providing charity, with monasteries, convents, and hospitals offering shelter, food, and basic care for the indigent elderly. However, these institutions were often overcrowded, and the care provided could be minimal. Begging was a common reality for the poor and elderly without support networks, sometimes regulated by local ordinances. Towns might also have almshouses, often funded by wealthy benefactors or guilds, specifically for the care of their aged and infirm members. These places offered a measure of dignity and security, but were not universally available. The concept of unproductive in this context did not always mean worthless. As discussed, elders could still contribute through their wisdom, experience, and the performance of lighter domestic duties, such as childcare or simple household tasks. An old woman might spin yarn, mend clothes, or shell peas, contributing to the household economy in ways that did not require heavy physical exertion. An old man might repair tools, teach younger generations, or oversee livestock. These contributions, while not always directly quantifiable in terms of economic output, were nevertheless valuable to the household and community. However, the fundamental economic shift remained. The ideal was a multi-generational household where the young provided labor and the old provided guidance and continuity. The economic strain of supporting non-laboring members was undeniable, especially in times of famine or hardship. The burden of caring for an elderly parent or grandparent could be considerable for families living on the edge of subsistence. This economic reality underscored the vulnerability of the elderly and the critical importance of strong family ties and community support systems in an era without state-sponsored pensions or comprehensive social welfare. The perception of an elder as unproductive was a direct consequence of their physical decline, a challenge that society grappled with through a mix of familial duty, charitable provision, and formal agreements. Number 8. Old age as a precursor to illness and melancholy. The medieval understanding of old age was intrinsically linked to a heightened susceptibility to illness and a particular vulnerability to melancholy. This was not merely a casual observation, but a deeply ingrained belief within medical theory and popular thought, positioning the latter years of life as a period of inevitable physical and mental fragility. The aged body was seen as a failing structure, more prone to disease, and the aged mind as susceptible to despondency, further reinforcing the idea of old age as a challenging and often somber final chapter. Medical texts of the era, heavily influenced by humoral theory, explained this increased susceptibility. As the body cooled and dried, its natural defense mechanisms were believed to weaken. The humors, no longer in their youthful balance, were thought to putrefy more easily, leading to various ailments. Joints might stiffen and ache, attributed to a buildup of cold, damp phlegm. Breathing difficulties and coughs were common, seen as a consequence of weakening internal organs. Skin conditions and digestive issues were also frequently associated with advanced age, interpreted as signs of a body no longer able to effectively expel impurities or maintain proper internal equilibrium. Fevers, though dangerous at any age, were particularly feared for the elderly, whose weakened constitutions were less able to withstand the heat and disruption. Beyond specific physical ailments, melancholy was a prominent concern for the aged. Melancholy, in the medieval sense, was a humorally based condition characterized by profound sadness, apathy, and sometimes irrational fears. It was associated with an excess of black bile, which was itself a cold and dry humor. Given that old age was defined by increasing coldness and dryness, it logically followed within the humoral framework that the elderly would be more prone to an accumulation of black bile, and thus to melancholy. This was not considered a psychological disorder in the modern sense, but a physiological imbalance. An old person becoming withdrawn, gloomy, or irritable was often seen as a direct consequence of their aging body, a natural outcome of their humoral constitution. This belief had practical implications for care. Physicians might prescribe specific diets and remedies to counteract the accumulation of black bile, often involving warming and moistening foods to balance the dominant cold and dry humors. Purgatives might be used to expel excess humors, and specific herbs known for their warming qualities could be incorporated. Gentle exercise, agreeable company, and pleasant environments were also sometimes recommended to uplift the spirits and mitigate the effects of melancholy. Recognizing that external factors could influence the internal balance, the connection between old age, illness, and melancholy was also reflected in literature and art. Elderly characters in morality plays or folk tales were often depicted as infirm, suffering from various aches, or burdened by a pervasive sadness. The image of the old person sighing, lamenting the past, or expressing a general sense of weariness with life was a common trope. This portrayal served as a reminder of life's fragility and the inevitable decline, reinforcing the idea that old age was a time when the body began its final descent and the mind, though potentially wise, could also be overcome by a profound sense of sorrow. It was a belief that painted old age with a somewhat somber brush, While some found spiritual solace in their later years, the physical and emotional challenges were clearly acknowledged and theorized within the dominant medical paradigms. The perceived link between aging and an increased susceptibility to illness, combined with a tendency towards melancholy, meant that the final decades of life were understood as a period requiring greater care, medical attention, and often a degree of compassionate understanding for the profound changes occurring within the body and spirit of the aged individual. Number 9. The role of the elderly in maintaining lineage and memory. In a world before extensive written records, genealogical charts, or widespread literacy, the elderly served as living archives crucial for maintaining the lineage, memory, and cultural continuity of families and communities. Their long lives meant they were the primary custodians of ancestral knowledge, oral histories, and the complex web of relationships that defined medieval society. This often unstated but profoundly important role granted elders a unique social value transcending their physical capabilities, and emphasizing their intellectual and historical contribution. For noble families, the memory of the elderly was paramount for preserving the family's honor, claims to land, and political alliances. An old lord or lady could recall generations of ancestors, their deeds, their marriages, and their feuds. They knew which branch of the family held, which fief, who was related to whom by blood or marriage, and the origins of specific family customs or rivalries. This knowledge was vital for strategic marriages, inheritance disputes, and diplomatic negotiations. Such information passed down orally was often more trustworthy than hastily scribbled documents, especially in earlier parts of the medieval period. The oldest living relative was often the most reliable source for a family's history, their memory a living testament to their lineage's past glories and claims. In peasant communities, the elderly played a similar, though perhaps less grand, role. They remembered land boundaries established generations ago, the customary rites associated with particular plots, and the history of crop yields in various weather conditions. They could recount stories of past famines, plagues, or successful harvests, providing crucial context for current challenges. They knew the unwritten laws and customs of the village, guiding younger generations on how to resolve disputes, conduct communal activities, or celebrate traditional festivals. Their recall of past events, whether local floods or the building of the parish church, provided a sense of continuity and shared identity for the community. The elderly were also often the primary educators for younger children within the household, especially in the early stages of life. Grandparents might teach grandchildren practical skills, traditional songs, moral lessons, and crucially, the stories of their family and ancestors. These narratives instilled a sense of belonging and reinforced societal values. Transmission of oral traditions, folklore, and local legends often rested with the older generation who had heard these tales since their own childhoods, and now passed them on, ensuring their survival. Beyond factual information, the elders embodied a living connection to the past. Their presence was a tangible link to previous generations, reinforcing the idea of a continuous flow of time and inherited identity. They were witnesses to history, not just through their memories, but through their very being. The scars on an old warrior's body told tales of past battles. The worn hands of an old woman spoke of decades of labor, and the wrinkles on their faces were maps of lives lived. These physical manifestations of age, while sometimes signifying decay, also represented a lived history. In a society where historical records were fragmented and personal histories were often not written down, the collective memory of the elderly was an irreplaceable resource. They were the custodians of identity, the narrators of the past, and the living embodiment of tradition. Their role in maintaining lineage and communal memory was a powerful, quiet contribution that ensured the survival of social structures, cultural practices, and the very fabric of identity for families and communities across the medieval landscape. This vital function often outweighed the concerns about their physical decline, granting them a unique and profound position within the societal framework.